There are two main species of freshwater eel in New Zealand, the longfin eel and the shortfin eel. When viewed side by side, there are obvious differences in their head shape and size, with the shortfin eel being the smaller of the two species, usually under 2 kilograms in weight. The shortfin also prefers slower moving rivers, ponds and lakes. The longfin eel prefers faster flowing rivers or clear water lakes and is typically between 2 and 4 kilograms in weight, although some get much larger than this. Both species enter our waterways from the sea, beginning their upstream journey as juvenile glass eels, but quickly developing into elvers, miniature versions of the adult eels. These young eels move steadily upriver until they find a suitable home, growing all the while. The adult eels will spend anywhere between 10 and 40 years living in fresh water before migrating back downstream to the sea to spawn. During the time they are in our waterways, eels are basically looking for three things: a plentiful food supply, clean water, and good cover in the form of overhanging banks, submerged logs, and large rocks or root masses where they can hide during the day. Since humans first came to New Zealand, massive changes have been wrought on the landscape. What was once forest and swamp has been cleared to make way for pasture. Along the way, bush has been felled, wetlands have been drained, and rivers and streams diverted, straightened, and regulated by weirs and floodgates. Many of our waterways have been dammed to generate power, and the construction of these dams on both large and small river systems has resulted in huge areas that were once eel habitat becoming completely inaccessible to eels. The intensive farming taking place across New Zealand has also meant that a lot of waterways are now loaded with nutrients from fertiliser runoff, depleting dissolved oxygen and greatly reducing water quality. There are still rivers in New Zealand that pass through bush and forest from source to sea, but in general, nowadays when eels swim upstream, they are entering a highly modified environment. The fertile and productive lowland habitat that eels have always favoured, with their naturally meandering and slower flowing waterways, are now the areas being most intensively farmed, something eels have to adapt to in order to survive. Fortunately, eels are a hardy species, and as long as they are still able to fulfil those basic needs of good water quality, plenty of cover, and an adequate food supply, they are able to adapt quite well to living alongside humans in areas of intensive farming. In fact, studies have shown that pastureland can be extremely productive for eels, and farm rivers often hold 10 times the biomass of eels as do rivers flowing through native bush. This only holds true, however, if there is also reasonable water quality and adequate underwater cover for them. Many New Zealand rivers flowing through farmland have historically been bordered with willow trees, planted to stabilise the banks, provide a bit of welcome shade and summer fodder for stock. From an eel's perspective, not only do willow trees provide great underwater habitat and cover during the day, their leaves dropping into the water also provide food and habitat for aquatic insects, which in turn provide sustenance for smaller eels and the fish which the larger eels eat. Indeed, willows are the perfect riverside tree for an eel. From a farming perspective, willows are an excellent river management tool, being easily established, fast growing and palatable for stock.
As long as you maintain them and keep them trimmed and leave the root structure there, they're as good as gold.
As would be expected from a tree species that has evolved to live on riverbanks, they also have a strong, extensive root mass, which is ideal for stabilising banks. Their fine submerged roots also draw nutrients directly from the water, providing a natural river filtration system and resulting in a clearer, cleaner waterway. However, unfortunately for our eels and other aquatic life, there has been an attitude shift in recent times towards removing willows entirely from riverbanks in favour of planting native species like flax, which, although attractive to look at, do not provide the underwater habitat and water filtration that willows are able to. Native tree species are also generally much slower growing than willows, and it is a long time before native trees become large enough to shade a river or really stabilise its banks. Even when well grown, they don't develop the submerged root masses that characterise willow trees, and which provide such perfect habitat for those eels living in the increasingly modified river systems of New Zealand's lowland dairy farms. When any tree species are removed from riverbanks on farmland, there is a noticeable increase in suspended sediment and a corresponding drop in water quality. And of course, sooner or later, all small rivers drain into larger rivers. To begin with, the sheer volume of bigger rivers means the effect of runoff from these small streams is diluted. But eventually, the cumulative effect of many such waterways emptying into a river results in lowered water quality and clarity, no matter how big the river. Naturally, this also affects the species that live there. The only alternative to riparian planting is intensive riverbank management, using large rocks or gabions to stabilise the riverbank. However, this is a costly process and generally requires ongoing maintenance. Riparian willows, on the other hand, can be easily and more cost-effectively managed simply by periodic trimming or spraying every year or two. Our eels are fascinating creatures and part of our culture and heritage. What kid hasn't gone looking for eels with a spotlight at night? They are also our only commercial freshwater fish species, and not only is smoked eel a New Zealand favourite, our eels are exported to markets around the world. Jacques Boubet is a fishery scientist who spends a large amount of time researching eel recruitment in our waterways.
Currently, most of the eel consumed around the world, they're produced on aquaculture farms. And as at the moment no one can breed eels artificially, the stock for those farms come from the wild. That means that wild stock are really very important. And for that wild stock, of course, it means that they need habitat. And the most important habitat, in my experience, are the willow-clad streams that are around the country.
If we want eels to continue to be around for future generations, we have to ensure there is suitable habitat for them. And there are a few simple things that we can do to achieve this. Firstly, we can retain willow trees along farm waterways. As well as providing great habitat for eels and other aquatic life, willows help maintain river health in our intensively farmed areas by acting as filters. Their extensive submerged root systems helping to absorb the much higher nutrient loading present in many New Zealand rivers since the advent of intensive fertiliser use. Fertiliser runoff reduces the oxygen content of the water and can cause algal blooms in lakes and ponds. Blooms which are toxic not only to aquatic life like eels, but also to stock, humans and other wildlife. Ideally, using less fertiliser is the answer, but retaining riparian willow plantings and retaining or re-establishing small wetlands and patches of willow on farmland can help alleviate this nutrient overloading in farm waterways. The other thing we can do is moderate the way we clean farm drains and streams. Farm drains and even quite small streams have the potential to hold healthy populations of eels if they are just left alone, or at least not scraped out completely. As long as the drain is deep enough, its drainage ability will not be impaired by allowing plant growth on the banks, and the water quality of the drain will be far better. We can consider allowing non-destructive flooding. Nowadays, preventing rivers from topping their banks and flooding is a strong priority in most places. But in fact, flooding is a natural occurrence that is very good for eels. In high water, they're able to forage across a huge amount of land and access vastly more food than normal. And flooded pasture land is particularly productive. From a human perspective, floods also slow the flow of the main river channel by dissipating water across a wide area, thereby saving banks from further erosion, and has the added benefit of spreading nutrient-rich silt carried in the water back out across the land, rather than washing this valuable soil down to the sea where it is lost for good. We can provide ways for eels to get around flood pumps and flap gates. Flood pumps kill thousands of eels. Unfortunately, they are a necessary tool in our heavily modified lowland farm country. However, there are alternative flood pump options available now that are more eel friendly and councils need to start considering these alternatives. Creating simple fish ladders beside flapgates, weirs and even dams can also help greatly in allowing eel movement and migration, making habitat re-available that has been lost over the years through river development and modification. Mike Holmes is chairman of the Eel Enhancement Company, a company focused on the long-term sustainability of eel populations in New Zealand.
From the Eel Enhancement Company's point of view, we want to ensure that we have healthy, sustainable populations of eels in our rivers and waterways. We have to accept that these rivers and waterways have been greatly modified by the advent of farming. And farming is what we do in New Zealand. It's our main industry, and I think it'll always stay that way. So we have to accept that these rivers and waterways have changed and they're going to stay changed, and farming's not going to go away, so we have to live with what we've got now. We think we can, and we think we can improve the way we manage these waterways so that they produce better populations, and I think that's all possible if we do things a little differently. We should allow for a lot better riverbank management. In particular, willow trees are really important to managing riverbanks. They keep the banks stable, they provide cover, they provide food, they provide shade, they provide all the things that we need for eels. So willows are really, really important. Now, some people would suggest that we plant natives, but the fact is that there are no native trees that really can replicate or even get anywhere close to what a willow can do in a riverbank environment. Willows evolved on riverbank. They're excellent filter trees, they pull nutrients out of the water, they do all the good stuff we need.
It is not often that the best option for improving the chances of a species surviving is also the easiest and cheapest option from a human perspective. But in the case of New Zealand's freshwater eels, doing less is doing more. Simply by leaving willow trees to grow along our waterways, whether farm riverbanks, streams, drains or wetlands, we can help ensure that eels in these modified environments still have suitable habitat and a chance to live, grow and return to the sea to spawn.